When Donald Trump called Georgia Republicans and said, I just need you to find me 11,000 votes, they said, no, sir, that's a step too far. But when he called Texas Republicans and said, I need you to steal me 5 seats, they said, does July work for you? Well, it doesn't work for us. What we are doing is the fundamental protection by our founding fathers in the Texas Constitution.
Lawmakers in Texas have been in the news this month for leaving their state to protest the unfair redrawing of district maps, also known as gerrymandering. Almost all Americans, regardless of political party, are against gerrymandering. But over the past few decades, it's gotten worse and worse. So, what exactly is gerrymandering? Why is it legal? And how do we get back to a fair system where all of our votes matter equally? Gerrymandering is one of those things that makes people tune out of politics. It doesn't just sound technical and complicated, it feels so far outside of our control. But it's important to know about, because we all deserve to have our votes count. Gerrymandering is basically politicians picking their voters, instead of the other way around. It's become a much bigger problem recently, but the term comes from all the way back in 1812. Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry signed a bill to redraw district maps in his state, and one of the new districts in the Boston area was said to resemble the shape of a salamander. So from there, gerrymander came about to mean any redrawing of districts to unfairly favor one political party or the other. Yes, his name was pronounced Gary, but the term became gerrymander. Nobody really knows why it's not called gerrymandering, but here we are. Redistricting starts with the census. Every 10 years, the United States does a census of its citizens. You might remember someone from the Census Bureau knocking on your door in 2010 or 2020 to ask how many people live in your household, their age, gender, and race. That information is used to make sure we have the right number of representatives elected to the House from each state. If a state's population has grown since the previous census, they might have more districts added. If a state's population has decreased, they might lose a few districts. 7 states have a small enough population that they only have 1 district each, which makes things simple. But for all the others, someone has to draw the maps that determine which people should vote in which districts. In most states, they're drawn by the state legislature, and in a few states, it's up to a nonpartisan group or committee. In theory, the maps are supposed to evenly divide up the residents of the state, so that everyone's voice is heard. But in practice, they're often drawn unfairly to favor one political party or the other. Sometimes it's to split a minority population amongst multiple districts, to reduce that group's ability to elect a representative in any district, which is known as cracking. And sometimes it's to dilute a minority group's voting power across the state by putting all of them into a single district, which they call packing. That's what gerrymandering is, and it's one of the biggest threats to our free and fair democracy. Both parties have been known to participate in gerrymandering, but over the past few decades, it's almost exclusively been Republicans who have been manipulating the maps. That's not political speculation. Many Republican leaders have come right out and said so. They even have an official project named Operation REDMAP, which stands for Republican Redistricting Majority Project. They've been focusing on states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, where there was a small Democratic majority, but they could swing the state Republican through redistricting.
They take those states that are purple states and they guarantee that there is a Republican majority in the legislature. So after 2010, Operation REDMAP was in place in these states, and they put in place extraordinary gerrymanders. So states like North Carolina, which is really purple. I mean, North Carolina is just pretty much 50-50 of a state. The Republicans could get the vast majority of the seats because of redistricting.
In Ohio, another really gerrymandered state, the state Supreme Court ruled that their district maps were unconstitutional, not once, but 3 times. The maps had been drawn by a group of politicians who were mostly Republicans, but they decided to ignore the court's ruling and keep using the gerrymandered maps. Voters even tried to pass an amendment against gerrymandering in this past election, but Republican Secretary of State Frank LaRose worded the ballot language in a way that confused voters. The ballot amendment was to form an independent, non-political group to draw the new maps. But on people's ballots, it said that the amendment would, quote, require gerrymandering and repeal constitutional protections. As a result, Ohioans voted against it, even those who were against gerrymandering. In Texas, Republicans are trying to draw new district maps right now. Even though it's usually done every 10 years after a new census, President Trump asked them to do one this summer.
We have an opportunity in Texas to pick up 5 seats, and I won Texas. I got the highest vote in the history of Texas, and we are entitled to 5 more seats.
That's right. He feels entitled to it. And it's worth mentioning that although Trump did get the highest vote total in the history of Texas, that's because the population has been increasing. More people on average vote in every election as we grow as a nation. Trump's margin of victory in Texas in 2024 was 13%, which is lower than what Mitt Romney or George W. Bush received, just to name a few recent examples. And yet, we didn't see Bush asking for redistricting like this. When a reporter asked why Texas representatives are redistricting now, Republican Mitch Little replied,
"Because we can. We have the votes. It's legal for us to do so. It's legal for us to draw the lines based on political performance."
So, because you can, why should you, though?
Because it's good for our party, it's good for our state, and we need to ensure that Donald Trump's agenda continues to be enacted throughout his second term.
So you're doing this for President Trump?
You may be wondering, how is this even legal? He says they're doing it because they can, but why can they? Well, it's not in the Constitution, for one thing. The Founding Fathers laid out how many people each House rep should represent, 1 for every 30,000 people, which has been raised as our population has grown. But they left it to each state legislature to decide how they're divided out. They didn't even include the idea of districts. We could have a system where everyone votes statewide for the representatives, with each state still having the right number of reps for their population size. There are certainly arguments for voting by district, the way that we do now. People throughout each state don't have the same concerns and priorities, so this way, every area gets their own representation. But surely the Founding Fathers never intended us to have a district that looks like a salamander, or Ohio's infamous District 4 that looks like a duck. Okay, so it's not in the Constitution. But why haven't we made laws in the meantime that stop gerrymandering? The answer, in part, is because the Supreme Court decided that gerrymandering isn't a legal problem. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 says you can't draw district lines in order to crack or pack racial minorities. But there's nothing in there about drawing the maps along political lines. In 2019, the Supreme Court ruled on a case about gerrymandering called Rucho versus Common Cause. The case was over how district maps were drawn in North Carolina. Remember, North Carolina is pretty evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. But after the 2010 census, their new maps were drawn to favor Republicans in 9 out of 13 districts. Republican State Representative David Lewis, one of the men in charge of drawing the maps, actually said, quote, "I propose that we draw the maps to give a partisan advantage to 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats, because I don't believe it's possible to draw a map with 11 Republicans and 2 Democrats." He ended up with 9 and 4. North Carolina state courts ruled that the new maps were unconstitutional, and the case ended up being appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. But the court decided, in a 5-4 decision, that gerrymandering is a political issue and not a legal one. Chief Justice John Roberts basically said that gerrymandering might be bad, but it's not illegal. It's up to Congress and each state to decide on their district maps, and it's not the Supreme Court's business to stop them. Justice Elena Kagan didn't agree.
The practices challenged in these cases imperil our system of government. Part of the court's role in that system is to defend its foundations. None is more important than free and fair elections. With respect, but deep sadness, Justices Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and I dissent.
They came to a similar decision, too, about a gerrymandering case in Wisconsin called Gill versus Whitford, over new district lines that favored Republicans, drawn by, you guessed it, Operation REDMAP. Just like the case in North Carolina, the court decided that gerrymandered maps weren't the business of the Supreme Court. And last year, they ruled the same way on Alexander versus South Carolina NAACP, saying that Republican-drawn maps in South Carolina were legal because they weren't discriminating against black voters, just against Democrats. Racial gerrymandering is, theoretically, still illegal, but partisan gerrymandering is apparently fine. Of course, the fact that most black voters have historically been Democrats means that, in a lot of ways, racial and partisan gerrymandering are basically the same thing. And in any case, isn't all gerrymandering bad? So, if the Supreme Court has decided that gerrymandering isn't illegal or unconstitutional, it's up to Congress to stop it. Voters from all parties are against gerrymandering, no matter who's doing it. The majority of gerrymandering may be done by Republicans, but it isn't fair no matter which party does it. Democratic governors in states like California and Illinois are threatening to redraw their own district lines in response to what's going on in Texas right now. And frankly, that's not okay either. We all deserve for our voices to be heard in a fair and equal way. Gerrymandering doesn't have to be illegal to be wrong.